You're watching Prep for Retirement Television. I'm your host, Cheryl Tan, and financial advisor Patrick Moriarty is here, and we're talking about our second leaf. And that leaf is something that we all know very well, inflation. And that has really been something that's been on all of our minds recently. How do you handle inflation when it comes to thinking ahead for retirement?
Inflation has really reared its head, right? Its ugly head over the past 2 years. I like to call inflation the silent killer because it eats at our purchasing power down the road for those same dollars. But right now, it's screaming in our face. You know, we have inflation of, 7, 8, 9%, right? And so it's real. And so it's part of the planning process. What the Federal Reserve is trying to do, they're trying to raise rates to bring it down. And it will come down over time. I'm sure it will. It won't stay this high forever. But inflation, it's here. It's always part of the planning process. And when I talk about inflation, whether it's in my workshops or on the TV show or with clients, I usually like to throw in some personal experience with inflation. So I want to share one really quick with the viewers. I was in Florida over the winter with my wife, and we went into the local grocery store, Publix, and we were in the cereal aisle. And we were in there early, and the employees were in there, and they were stocking shelves and changing prices. And I saw an employee change the price on one of the products on the shelf. And I said to my wife, I've got to see this. This is inflation in action. I want to see it. So they were changing prices on Pop-Tarts. Now, I love Pop-Tarts, but my wife doesn't let me eat them anymore. But I wanted to see the price change. So we took the price tag off the shelf, and it was $2.45 per pack. Mm-hmm. Put the new price on, it was $3.25.
Wow.
That's not 8%, that's not 10%, that's closer to 30%. So the federal government says one thing, we all have personal experiences of what inflation really is, and we're paying a lot more for the same goods.
Yeah, well, that's a great story, showing us what we have been seeing, right? The price change right before your very eyes, honestly.
Oh, yeah, it's with us. And again, it has to be part of the planning process. So the cost of goods will go up. There's no question about it. We even have something called shrinkflation. And shrinkflation, it happens a lot in the grocery store where we're maybe paying the same price, but we're getting less goods. They're making the bag smaller. They're putting less in the can, right? So inflation is really a big part of the planning process. And, if we take an example of an individual who's retired today and they want to spend, let's just say $60,000 a year in retirement, $5,000 a month after taxes, because we have to pay taxes first. Do you think that person can live on that same $60,000 a year, let's say 12 years from now?
I wish the answer was yes, but I know the answer is no.
That's right.
It'd have to be much, much more.
Exactly. Let's do an exercise on inflation so that the viewers know how it can impact our spending. So if we have someone who's starting out $60,000 a year after taxes, and we have just a 3% rate of inflation over 12 years, they would have to spend, you ready for this? Mm-hmm. $90,000 a year.
Oh my.
It goes up by 50%. So it's real. Then that's just at 3% inflation, not 8, not 7, not 9.
Right. A more normal rate of inflation.
That's the rate I use when I put a plan together for my clients. Okay. We use a 3% inflation rate.
So that was 12 years.
That's 12.
Let's go further out.
Right.
Let's say 24 years.
Right,
how do you plan for that?
Yeah, let's double it. So 65. $60,000 a year after tax, of course. Add 24 years to that, so what's that? 89 years old, right? Will they still be able to buy the same goods and services at $60,000 a year? And no, because of inflation. So at 3% inflation over 24 years, they need double. They need $120,000 a year after taxes. Mm-hmm. So that's what we have to, that has to be part of the planning process, is knowing what the future costs are going to be.
So you've laid it out. Now we know we need a lot more than we think we do. How do we combat that in retirement?
Great question. And that's what we have to do. We have to combat inflation. We have to try and beat inflation by having our assets grow, at least some of our assets grow, at a rate higher than inflation. So if we're factoring in 3% in our planning process, some of our assets have to grow more than that, right? Some of them have to be growth oriented. They have to be at risk. You know, we've talked about those 3 buckets of investing. That's the third bucket. That's our inflation fighter. That's our growth bucket. That's the money that we want to outpace inflation to help us pay for the higher prices in the future. And that's a simple way. We can't leave it all in the bank. We can't have it all, you know, in guarantees at 2 or 3%. We need some of it out there outpacing inflation.
As we've talked about these 3 buckets, sometimes it might seem, oh, let's just have one, let's have the other, but that's why you have the 3 buckets clearly laid out. And people might wonder for their own portfolios how to create that.
Correct.
So how do you help people figure out the buckets?
You know, it's the planning process. It's really looking at everything, not just their assets, right? Not just how much they've accumulated, but what type of income do we have coming in? What does the tax picture look like? What kind of inflation rate do you want to use? 3%, 2%, 5%, right? What is your budget? How much are you going to spend in retirement? How long are you going to live, right? I mean, all of these things are part of the planning process and affect the outcome of a plan, and inflation is part of that. So it's looking at everything, looking at their total situation and putting together a great plan that includes rising cost of living.
Too often do you find that people are not asking those questions of themselves?
Well, when you don't have a plan, you don't see the effect of the numbers. You don't see the cash flow. You don't see that 60,000 in the first year becomes 61 or 62, and then it becomes 65, and then it becomes 70, and then it becomes 80. When you see it in a plan and you see the cash flow and you see the rising income that you're going to get because of inflation, you have to see the projections, and it's with a written plan.
If people have questions, how can they reach out to you?
Well, they can call us. Our local number is 410-599-3300. We set aside, 10 appointments every week to sit down and meet with us. No cost, no obligation. Don't bring a checkbook. We're just trying to have a conversation about what your needs are. Maybe I can help you, maybe I can't, but I'll tell you. If you're a techie, you can take a picture of our QR code and it'll take you right to my calendar. You can set an appointment that way. So that's the easiest way to have the discussion.
All right, we've got one more retirement planning topic. Great. That's after the break.
No matter what